So every sin that Allah has promised the fire in the hereafter or a punishment in this life, that is what we know to be a major sin. As stated by Abu Salih and Ibn Abbas and Ad-Dahhak. All of what constitutes disobedience of Allah is sin, but we are talking about this matter. And so every sin that Allah has promised the fire for, this is a major sin. As said by Al-Hasan, Sa'id ibn Jubayr, Mujahid, Ad-Dahhak, and Az-Zujaj. And then finally we say that some have mentioned major sins to be 8, which are mentioned as associating partners with Allah, disobeying the parents, murder of a believer, slandering chaste women, fornication and adultery, consuming the wealth of the orphan, bearing false witness, and a man selling his oath so that he might make money therewith. And all of this discussion was narrated from Al-Hasan Al-Basri. Close quote. Alright, for those, it may be important to mention, Al-Hasan Al-Basri is the top student of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. He came from a Christian family and came home one day and said that the religion of his parents were wrong. He was a young child, about 8 years old. He said, all of what you're upon is wrong, and you must change immediately. And his parents subsequently became Muslim. Further to this, Shahadatul Zur. Now, one of our living ulama of the past, he died in 1971, rahimahullah, Imam Muhammad Al-Amin Al-Shinqiti. He was sitting in his class one day and he was discussing different ayat of the Quran. And this expression is mentioned in Surah Al-Zumar and other ayat. And he said, do you know what Shahadatul Zur, what the false witness is? And the student said, no. He said, they are the Shahada graduate certificates that the Islamic universities hand out. And he said, and you will not receive one of those from me. No one that has sat with me in this class that claims one of those certificates will receive any authorization from me at all. None except those that sit with me receive authorization. What is he talking about? Imam Muhammad Al-Amin Al-Shinqiti rahimahullah is from Lahsira, which is a hostile, arid, unforgiving section of Mauritania, which in Arabic we call Shinqit. If you get a chance to look at the picture of Sheikh Muhammad Al-Amin Al-Shinqiti, you can tell by his expression and his demeanor, even though he's a noble alim, he comes from a very, very rough place. He came in 1949 to Arabia. And coming from Mauritania, the sole madhab of Mauritania is the Maliki madhab. He came, looked at the books, because again, the Mauritanians, strong history of memorizing. Bedouin community, because these are Yemenis that migrated to Mauritania. These are Yemenis, that's all they are. They're Yemenis that migrated. So if you look at them, they bear a striking resemblance to the Yemenis. Big head, the slightly inflated ears, the large nose, the very big chin. They have very big bodies, but their hands are very light. Even though they're tall, they have small hands and small feet for their body size. So he comes there, and he sat with some of the ulama there. And he brought some of his sons with him as well. And he went into one of the libraries of that time, and he memorized because he was shown some books, he memorized 37 volumes within a few months. He memorized another couple of books, and he began teaching there. They asked him to teach there. But he said, wherever I teach, the students must sit with me personally. And so they had him come in and sit down and teach at some of the universities. And one of the universities they invited him to, without him having foreknowledge of what it was about, was Muhammad ibn Saud, not Muhammad ibn Saud, this other monstrosity. He taught at one of those Salafi institutions. When he found out what it was about, that is when he said, these certificates are Shahadatul Zur. So if you do your 8 years at one of these so-called Islamic universities, you do your 8 years, you do your 6 years, and you graduate with this certificate, and you therefore become an alim. They've even renamed them, they've even called them for you alim courses, where you just come out of there, you become one of the ulama. This is people who've been gone for 6 years, he's been gone for 8 years, he becomes one of the ulama. He's been gone for 6, 7, 8 years. He becomes one of the ulama that quickly. This has been, they come back, he hasn't memorized the Quran, hasn't memorized one of the books of hadith, he's an alim all of a sudden. How did this happen? He hasn't done Umdat al-Ahkam, he's become an alim. How has he done this? So, part of it is a false witness. Why? Why did Imam al-Shanqiti say it's a false witness? Because it says on there, number one, that you're an alim, and number two, that you have all these qualifications that you've graduated. It's a false witness because you're bearing testimony to something that, number one, isn't true, and number two, hasn't been attested to by anyone else. Let me tell you what the righteous ulama do, and the righteous teachers do. People get what is called a thabit. A thabit, or in today's parlance, and after the khalaf, they sometimes use the expression ijaza, but sometimes people also use the word thabit or idhin. What it is what the student has done with the teacher and what he's memorized with the teacher. The teacher says, listen, student such and such, he's done this with me, he's done these books with me, I have found him sound, I am now turning him over to you. So whenever he wanted to go to another sheikh, he'd say, could I have a thabit? And the sheikh would give the thabit, and he'd say, I now turn him over to you. Or he says, I finished this, can I teach it? He says, yes, let me just check your understanding, check your memorization, go through everything else. He'd say, yes, I have therefore found that such and such has so on and so forth, completed this and completed that, and yes, I hereby give him permission to teach this and to do these other things. That's how we know. Why? Because you have suhbah and luzum with a sheikh or a teacher, and they can check to make sure that your understanding and your fahm is right. When you go to a so-called Islamic university or an Islamic place, it's bearing false witness because you're sitting in a classroom, hands down, mouth open. You could be biting your fingernails. At the end of the 6 to 8 years, what do? Well, you have to turn in your dissertation, don't you? I could write your dissertation for you. I could write it for you. So you pay me £50 or $100 or whatever the case is, pesos, and you turn in your paper. It's been done by me. Does the sheikh check your memorization? Does he check anything else? No, he doesn't do any of those things. But you finish the course. You finish the course and you come out, now you're doctor in Arabic, or doctora, magister, MBA, magister, doctor, PhD. Now you come out and no one can tell you anything. And people have this overall of you when they see you. But then someone comes in, he's just a sheikh. Someone comes in and spiritually gives you a pistol whipping in the speech of Allah. You know how many 8-year Ilm course people I've seen sit down and have to be shown their P's and Q's by certified people? I watched a man who was one of the ulama on a 6-8 year course. There's a Quran class going on with children, and they're going and they're listening and everything else. And the man, he decides to join in and help. And the sheikh says, listen, you have to be quiet because you're causing them to make mistakes with yours. And this is supposedly the 6 to 8 year graduate. You're causing their tajweed to get worse with yours. Get back. This same individual leading the salah at one point, and the mistakes were so grave, from what I hear from witnesses, that someone actually came forward to tap him on the shoulder and replace him, to stand next to him so that he would make a second takbir and come out of the salah and intend that person. Because it was so bad, someone actually came out of the front saf and thought, Allah blessed him, I must contain this fitna before it gets worse. Because I must stop this. And this is the disease of the Islamic University. It's the disease. Someone can't properly have a witness, a true shahada, unless they've actually, they've had to be checked and looked over and made sure that their understanding is right. Because what you don't want to have happen is when you send this person out into the world, that person goes astray or they cause tribulation. And I gave this example, I'll say it very quickly. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, when he learned from Hamad, and people used to ask him questions, he went to Imam Hamad and he asked him a question and he gave him the answer. He said, is it valid for me to attribute this answer to you exactly in the wording that you gave me? And he said, yes, you may attribute this answer to me. And he came out to the people and he said, my Sheikh Hamad has said, and he would attribute it to him. You see, this is understanding what the knowledge is about. Understanding where the information came from. Like where Imam Malik rahimahullah, one day Sufyan al-Thawri came to visit him and he found Imam Malik, he was sweating and wiping sweat from his brow. And he said, why are you sweating? He said, oh, I just left from having a large discussion on fiqh with Imam Abu Hanifa. He said, what a faqih that man is. You see, it's that understanding where people have gotten a taste of your flavor, because all of you have different personality types. And so a teacher will know what you can bear. This person can do 20 lines. This person can do 5 lines. This person can do this much. This person can do that much. This person, he may be able to do this many. He will know what all of those things are. When someone goes into the university, that is mass education. That's oatmeal for everyone. And you and I know that everyone doesn't have the same flavor. Oatmeal for everyone. Could you imagine if I cooked one standard of meat for all of you and gave it to you? And you know how I am about spicy food, so obviously you're not going to eat it. You're going to reject it. And say, this meat's been poisoned. It has no taste, it has no flavor. Brother Abu Ja'far's poisoned us. But why? Because people have certain ways about them that teachers recognize and can say, okay, listen, your usul fiqh is not as strong as your tafsir. You focused on your tafsir, you've done well. I think you need to work on your usul fiqh. Okay, this is strong in this area, this is not. But what's happened? Guys have run in 6-8 years and they've come out. And you can see how lopsided they are because of the way that they speak and how they deal. They're overwhelmed by their earthly life, but they believe that they have the answers to all the questions. And it bears reference in mind. And I'm not saying these people, they don't care about Islam, they don't love the deen. What I'm saying is to compare between what the preservers of knowledge look like versus people that have gone to the universities, these Muslim universities. Look at the level of these people. You can compare extremities, right? So when you compare extremities, you have a proper makeup of what's been made, right? You look at, for example, Badruddin al-Hasani, rahimahullah. The Dar al-Hadith is a place where someone could not become the rector unless they memorized the 100,000 hadith. It was opened by Imam Nawawi. The current rector is Rankusi, if memory serves me correct. One of the rectors before was Imam Mustafa Ash-Shati. So that makes you understand that these people had trained people. And once they found you authentic, they would say, well, this person should be a rector of Dar al-Hadith. This is Imam Mustafa Ash-Shati was a rector of Dar al-Hadith. It means he memorized 100,000. Right? These type of people, Badruddin al-Hasani, who he memorized the collections and other things. Not only that, but he used to teach from Bukhari with the book closed. Because he knew the Sahih of Imam Bukhari that well. He's one of the greatest Hanafi scholars that ever lived in the past 400 or 500 years. He's up there with Imam Muhammad Abu Zahra. You see, as these people, you look at their example versus people today. You have engineers and watch repairmen being called the muhaddiths of the age and scholars of the age. Those people are nothing. If they died and they'd never been heard of, it wouldn't have any impact on this ummah other than they would have been spared some of their fitna. So I say this to you because it's important that the shahadatul zur, the false witness, is a false testimony when someone says, oh yes, this person, he's an alim. He's an alim. Is he? Have you checked him? Have you looked into him? Oh, no, I haven't. But, alhamdulillah, he turned in his dissertation paper. He did this, he did. But that doesn't show that he's an alim. He hasn't been checked. He hasn't been tested. I read to you the motor car industrial magazine. Do you let me work on your Ford LeBaron coupe? Better not if you're smart. Because I don't know anything. I haven't been on the road with the mechanics. So it's important to understand. Now, Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, he says, quote, and when the Exalted One says, and he will expiate from you your sins, what the expiation is referring to is that those sins that had been done are the minor sins. And that the entering into the honorable place is the paradise. And that they're given extra honor because they avoided and stayed away from the major sins. Now when the Exalted One says, and don't desire that which Allah has favored some of you over the other therewith. The reason for the revelation of this ayah, there were 3 incidents that happened. One is that Salaba once said, Messenger of Allah, the men make jihad, but we don't make jihad. We only have half of the inheritance. And so Allah sent down this ayah, as mentioned by Mujahid. Secondly, is that the women said, we would love that Allah would make jihad required for us so that we can have some of the reward that the men have. And this ayah was sent down, and Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl mentioned this point. Thirdly, when the ayah, the male has the likeness of what 2 females have, they said, some of the men said, indeed, it's the case that we have been given preference over the females with our good deeds, just as he preferred us over the women in inheritance. And the women said, indeed, the responsibility upon us is half of what the responsibility is upon the men, just as we have half of the inheritance of what their inheritance is. And this ayah was sent down to clarify the matter, as mentioned by As-Sudai and Qatada ibn Da'imah. So the meaning of this expression, do not hope for, or hanker after, or race for, it means that the man or human being should not look for wealth other than his own. As said by Ibn Abbas and Ata. Number 2, it states that women should not seek after or try to be like men. And it was related from Salama that she said at one point, Oh, I wish that we were men. And this ayah was again recited. And so this matter, the human being shouldn't wish or hope that he has the wealth of someone else, or that someone else loses their wealth, because this is actually envy. And he shouldn't hope for or chase after something that belongs to other than him. And he also doesn't like it when someone loses their wealth or they lose something, because this is from a form of rank hatred. But this may be the extent of what happens when someone looks after something or seeks after something that is not theirs. Al-Hasan has said, do not seek after the wealth of such and such or someone else, nor the wealth of another person. It may be you don't know that the one racing after such wealth might be destroyed because of it. And the woman shouldn't try to be like a man, because this will never happen. You should know that Allah knows the slave. Let the slave know that Allah knows best of all of the affairs. And let them be pleased with the judgment of Allah. And that let the wish that someone has instead be that they might do more deeds for the sake of the hereafter.